Playsets were the pinnacle of any collection for a kid back in the 1990s. And if you were like me, you didn't get a playset every day. Those were saved for special occasions like birthdays or holidays. Maybe you'd get a few figures throughout the year, but really you'd hope to wake up on either your birthday or Christmas and find one of those big boxes wrapped up underneath the tree. And of course, if you had the figures, that was cool, but the anticipation was built up in different ways, either by seeing the toy commercial, or maybe you'd go into the toy store, you'd see the figures on top, the vehicles in the middle, and then the space at the bottom would be reserved for those giant playsets. And if you're thinking about the most iconic playsets ever, USS Flag for G.I. Joe, Castle Grayskull for Motu, those were iconic, but they did come out in the 80s. I was born in the 80s, but I was a kid in the 90s, so in this episode specifically, we're talking about the most iconic 90s playsets ever made. At the number 10 spot, we have the Fisher-Price Great Adventures Castle playset. This came out in 1994, and I was probably a little too old to be playing with Fisher-Price toys, but if you think about what Fisher-Price toys were before, they came out with people, but they were on these little bodies, and they had no arms or legs, and it was just a head. They would peg into a vehicle, but they really weren't that fun. And when the Great Adventures toy line came out, the castle was the first one that I remember because a neighbor had it, and I played with it. So, like, 8-year-old playing with Fisher-Price toys, maybe a little too old, but this is still a playset I hear people talk about, even if they're not in the toy collecting world. This castle came with a whole bunch of different features, a drawbridge, it came with a catapult for boulders, a cannon, it had a trap door, and it was just really fun. It came out with 2 sets of knights. You had the 4 gold knights and the 4 black knights. And then it also came out with other expansion packs that you can use. So there was a wizard pack, there was a dragon, there was a troll or a giant or cyclops, and then they also made some other ones like a pirate set, Robin Hood, a Wild West set. These Great Adventure sets really did hold up, and they kept going all the way to the early 2000s, but the castle set I think is the one that has endured the most. One of the other things I remember about the castle playset is, of course, you can play with it, and it came with figures and the castle, but it also did come with a CD-ROM. So at the time, everyone was starting to get a desktop computer, so that was really cool to see your parents do whatever they're doing on the computer, but then you can pop it in, and the adventure kind of continues, and it gave the characters voices, and it gave it storyline, so you can take that play from the interactive game and then incorporate that into your actual play with the figures in the play set and use your imagination. So pretty cool. At the number 9 spot, I'm going to put the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves Sherwood Forest playset. This was produced by Kenner in 1991, and it's making the list probably because of its cultural significance of blatantly ripping off another playset. And for those of you that know or don't know, this playset was the Ewok Village back in the original Star Wars line. All Kenner did was just take that playset, slap a different package on it, and then called it the Sherwood Forest playset. One of the only differences that I can tell is that the Sherwood Forest playset had some tree covering on it, but for the most part, it was like for like the same exact playset. Now, as a 4-year-old in 1991, I had no idea that the Ewok playset even existed, so why would I care? And if you were a Star Wars collector, if you, one, missed out on the playset for the Ewok Village, now you can buy the Sherwood Forest playset, use it for your Ewoks, or if you already had one and you just wanted to expand your collection, you probably could have bought the Sherwood Forest playset and then made a massive display for your Ewok characters. So I think it's pretty cool, and for that, that's why it's making the list of most iconic 90s playsets. So at the number 9 spot, the Sherwood Forest. At the number 8 spot, I have to put Hasbro's WWE wrestling ring on here. It was such a cool playset. Nothing to it really. It was a shell of plastic, but it had the 4 posts for the ropes. It had the red, white, and blue ropes, the American flag, the belt, and we love those Hasbro figures. My brother still collects them. He loves them. I think he's missing all but one. But we used to do lots of wacky stuff with this thing. We used to pull a figure back on the rope and kind of launch them forward. We used to find cassette tapes and play entrance music for the figures. I remember we played the song Bad Boys from the show Cops, and we would play that song when Big Boss Man was walking in. just an iconic playset. So for that, it definitely has to make the 90s best playset list. At number 7, I'm putting the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Power Dome. This is one I didn't have as a kid, and this is also one that I didn't even know existed, but I wish I did, because I had all of those flip head characters. I think those were some of the most genius figures ever made, and we had all the villains, and there was some that we were missing. We were missing some figures like Alpha 5, and this is a set where you can only exclusively get Alpha 5. So definitely one I missed out on, but in hindsight and thinking about the significance of Power Rangers, they kind of dethroned the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at the time. This was a great playset. So other than the features, it was just really, it kind of looked like what you saw on the screen when watching the show. You always saw the Rangers inside the command center with Alpha 5 and Zordon, and they represented that fairly well for the 90s. So you did have Zordon in the middle, and then at the bottom you had all the computer mechanisms and a little station for Alpha 5. Really cool. They had a transformation station, and then a little area off to the right side where you can put a small vehicle or something like that. So I just think back in the 90s, there was a lot of toys that were coming out where it just didn't look like what you saw on the screen. And this is one where I think they did a really good job of highlighting that. So wish I had this one. I do think it holds up on the list. And even if I didn't have it, I know that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, even to this day, have their stranglehold on pop culture. Number 6 is probably the most unique on my list, and that goes to the MicroMachines Super Van City by Galoob. This was produced in 1991, and it had a lot of great features. So one, it folded up into a van with working wheels so you can roll it and carry it. But it also opened up to an amazing scene. So it was, like it said, a city. You had a police station, a drawbridge, you had all these different roads that led to different things like a car wash station, a helipad. It had a race car track, so this thing had it all. We weren't really fans of playing with cars back as kids. They just weren't that interesting to us. But when MicroMachines started to produce play sets or figure sets that came with like little vehicles, that's where we had a lot of fun. Miniature Power Rangers, TMNT, and I would use this Super Van City with all of those. So it was just a city. So TMNT lived in New York. That works well for Super Van City. Power Rangers lived in Angel Grove. It can double as that. So it was just a super fun play set, and you had a lot of play options. One of my favorite things to do was to take my miniature Zords and play with them in that city. So really fun play set, different from most on the list, but I also think it is pretty iconic and relevant as one of the best play sets of the 1990s. My number 5 spot goes to Kenner's Star Wars Power of the Force 2 AT-AT or AT-AT, whatever you want to call it. This thing was super cool. I always wish I had it as a kid. I was a huge Power of the Force 2 collector, but I did miss out on this one. Every time I see it at a toy show, I'm tempted to get it, but I just don't have room for it now. But I would label this as a playset, not necessarily as a vehicle, because it really is not easy to move unless you have all hands on deck. So really, this could be a focal point of a display, especially as a kid. You can use other vehicles that can kind of fly around it, which I always thought was really cool, like TIE Fighters and Snow Speeders. And Hoth Battle was always one of my favorites, so maybe I'm a little biased to this one, but I just loved recreating that scene, and I was missing this piece. But any Star Wars collector would have been lucky to have this. It's almost like for like of what was released in the 80s with some differences. I know it came with more lights and sounds, which was cool. And I just always loved the look of it. You can rotate its head, and the gun turrets were cool. I think the original one had a little easier function. So, but if you were a kid growing up in the 90s, you didn't know much about that other one. So this would have been perfect for you. So I wish there was better play sets for Star Wars back in the 90s. We did get some, I would say, diamonds in the rough. There was a bunch of cardboard fold-out dioramas that were cool, not necessarily iconic. From episode 1, we did get some cool play sets, but again, I don't think they have the cultural significance of some of the play sets that came out from the original trilogy. So for that, number 5 goes to the AT-AT or AT-AT. Number 4 goes to Spider-Man's Daily Bugle. This was produced by Toy Biz in 1994. This was a massive playset that I always wish I had. I remember seeing it in stores. We weren't collecting a lot of Spider-Man figures at the time, but we were starting to, and it just looked super cool. We didn't have a lot of city buildings at the time. The only thing I can think of maybe was the Ghostbusters Firehouse, but this would have been a super fun playset to have. And if you did have it in the 90s as a kid, I'm sure it was one of your favorites as well. And this thing had tons of bells and whistles, a water tower, had a working crane, a searchlight, breakaway doors. It even had these gargoyles on the building that would break away, and some other different features that can like trap your figures, like a buzzsaw or a tentacle grabber for Doc Ock. So just a super cool playset, a beast of a playset. Probably took up a lot of real estate in kids' toy rooms, but definitely one that I would put on the top of the list as iconic 90s playsets. At the number 3 spot, I'm putting the Jurassic Park Command Compound. This came out by Mattel in 1993 alongside with the movie, and of course this was going to be a huge hit. Action figures mixed with dinosaurs. I think any kid would have loved to have this. I had the figures from the Lost World, so unfortunately I missed out on this one as a kid, but it did come with some awesome stuff. So as far as playsets go, it was pretty basic. It had a lot of fencing, but it did have that iconic archway from the movie, and even though it wasn't exact, it still gave the same effect when those gateways open up in the film. So I thought that was super awesome. Came with some electronic sounds, a net catapult, which was awesome, and then tons of breakaway pieces and parts for your dinosaurs to kind of bust through. So it was just super cool. This one I know definitely fetches for a hefty price tag on the secondary market. I wish I had my hands on it. Unfortunately, I'm not a huge Jurassic Park collector now. Otherwise, I'd probably definitely want to have that as a centerpiece for my Jurassic Park display. My number 2 spot goes to the Technodrome, produced by Playmates in 1990. In fact, even though the Sewer Lair came out in 1989, I think that the Technodrome is by far the superior playset. It doubled as a vehicle if you closed all the panels, but then you opened it up and it had this really cool scene inside. And one of the other things is you could connect it to your sewer lair, which is pretty awesome. But all the moving features, the eyeball can roll off. There was a prison. I remember used to putting Raphael inside the prison with the handcuffs. There was like some torture table where you can like spin the characters around. So much going on in this playset. And I think to this day is one of the best Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle playsets ever. And I would rank it above the sewer lair. So hopefully a lot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fans don't disagree with me. If you do, that's okay. But I think there was just a lot more play value with this particular playset. Villains, heroes, all mixed in. With the sewer lair, really it was just the bottom level was just for your turtles. You can have some fun scenes on top, but lots more playability with the Technodrome. Now, I mentioned before how Kenner had a knack for re-releasing something in a different package. Case in point, Ewok Village then became the Sherwood Forest playset. This playset that I'm about to tell you goes to my number 1 spot for most iconic playset of the 1990s, and that is the Batcave Command Center. And the reason I'm putting this at my number 1 spot is because Kenner kept re-releasing this playset in a new package, new deco, and it was really released to every new generation of kid that was pretty much coming up in the 90s all the way up into the early 2000s. So the one that I had in particular was the first and original one for Batman Returns. First talking about the playset, this thing kind of had it all. It had the Batcave where you can sit Bruce Wayne in, looking at the monitors, and depending on which version of this playset you had, all Kenner did was just change out the stickers. So for me, it was Batman Returns, so of course there was a lot of photos from the movie on those computer screens, and then they all came with this compartment where you can put Bruce Wayne on one side, spin it around, and then he would be in the Batman costume. So that was always super fun. There was a place to park your Batmobile, and then it had the front of Wayne Manor, which was super cool. So there was also this boiler room scene, which could just be a generic scene for any of your battle scenes with the villains, but the Wayne Manor part was actually pretty cool because it had breakaway doors, windows. There was a zip line function where you can clip onto the wrist of your figures and they would just kind of zip line over to the other side. But it was just awesome. It folded up, so it was really compact. And really, if you think about it, it has to be the most iconic playset of the 90s because every kid had some iteration of this if they did have it. Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, Batman the Animated Series, the newer version of the animated show, and then I think they released it again in another version where you can actually get Alfred. So this playset stood the test of time, spanning 12 years in different versions. Of course, I'm going to put the first as the most iconic because it's the original, but for that, I'm going to put just this Batcave Command Center as my number one most iconic playset of the 90s. All right, folks, what do you think of my list? Did I miss some playsets that were probably more iconic than the ones that I listed? If so, let me know down in the comments. Hope you enjoyed this form of video. There's going to be more of these coming, so until the next episode, we'll catch you next time.